Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here with all of you. Jaime Guzman with Nike, lead our social and community impact work here in Los Angeles. During this panel, we're going to talk about movement building. We're going to talk about the current state and, most importantly, the future of the play equity movement and how we can collectively work together to build upon it. And we're really, really lucky to have a group of folks here today that have been engaging in this conversation together for the last year and been doing this work for a lot longer. I won't say how much longer. But really, it's to think about the challenge that we're facing. And I'll say it, but I think we all know what that challenge is. We know that 70% of youth drop out by the age of 13. We know that that's exacerbated by socioeconomic issues, by gender identity, by race, by ethnicity. So we're here to make sure that kids everywhere have access to sport and play so that they can really reach their full potential. And as I said, we have a group of folks that have been working really hard to get kids and keep kids in sport. They all know each other really well, so I'm hoping that my job as a moderator will be very, very minimal and that they can really dialogue and have this conversation together. But I'm gonna introduce everyone, and we're gonna start off with a little, just a little question around the issue of movement building, how you all view that. But we're going to start off right here with Robert Marcus, who's the Chief Community Impact Officer of the Positive Coaching Alliance. Next to him, we have Beth Devine, who's the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative. We have Bookie Gates, who's the founder and president of Baseball Beyond Borders, and here with the Kings County Play Equity Coalition. And we also have Fernando Ramirez, who's the Vice President of the LA84 Foundation, the Play Equity Fund. So let's start off with, when you think about movement building, when you think about collective action, what does that mean for you? How does that show up for you in the work that you do? And that's for all the panelists, whoever wants to start.
Come on, Rob, man.
Everybody's looking at me, I guess. Okay. I mean, when you think about movement building and collective action, right, it's about like harnessing the power and the strength of community-based resources, cross-sector actors, and all moving towards the common goal to solve issues that, let's be honest, right, they feel intractable, right? Like these social inequities, play equity, sports play movement, these issues feel intractable. So if you can harness the power of collective action, you have a better chance of, one, creating sustainable solutions, and then solving these complex problems that are far too big for one organization to solve on their own. And then you wrap that up in a movement, then you can do the storytelling and everything that comes with it to raise awareness and motivate folks to really try to dive into what those root causes are that are leading to the inequities that our kids are dealing with every day.
I'll say this, every significant movement that we've seen across our country, across just history, started with grassroots. And when we think about the two things about grassroots organizations that they bring to the table is innovation and adaptability. Two things that larger institutions cannot fathom. They cannot embrace, they cannot understand what innovation and what adaptability really means. And when we talk about movement building, it requires us to really focus and center on the grassroots groups, right? That's where you're gonna see collective action really take place because there's already a community built. We don't have to manufacture a community or be a part of something that really doesn't make sense to you. It's also where your value's at. And a lot of us have to reevaluate really, why are we here? Why are we even in this space today? And I challenge you to think about that. That's where movement building begins, when you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm here because I was called to be here.
I think, I hate following Bookie, man. It's tough stuff. But I would just add that so much of the work is siloed, and movement building gives voice to the people that are like grinding. That are doing the work in communities, on playgrounds, in schools. You know, this our space often falls to like the nonprofit community. How ridiculous is that you have to start a nonprofit to provide sport for kids? So I think that the movement really allows for the voice to be uplifted from the people who are doing the work, who might not on their own say, help us out here, you know, because they're too busy doing the work. So I think movement building really just gives it a little oomph, and it gives it some coordination and alignment so that the stories can be lifted up.
I would just add, I think, building off of this, really the end goal is systems change, right? We do the movement building, we do the collective action to advance systematic change. And what that looks like is public policy, more resources, more parks, more access to parks, more coaches. And so I think collectively here in LA, we've had that motto, and working with my colleagues across the country, what can we, from the bottom up, create the system that advances a collective vision, a collective value, that at the end of the day creates systems that end those inequities, right? We see change and charity as our two objectives, with the end goal of really closing the play equity gap, and not to bring this back up, but really level the playing field. That's the end goal, I think, of our collective action. And so with our colleagues across the country, just sort of bringing those issues to light as a collective voice for our communities.
So give us a little peek behind the curtain. You all have been meeting together for over a year as the Voices of Play Equity, different cities across the country, different maturity of the movements. What is the current state of those conversations? I know they're lively. I know that there's a lot of dialogue. What are you learning from each other, and what does that say about the future of the work that you all are doing? How is that impacting the work that you all are doing?
But let me start with this one. I think we all came together, and we've been meeting frequently within the span of about a year and a half. But one thing I think that we can say in common is that many of our cities, many of the collective movements that we've been a part of have been very progressive in thought, but yet regressive in action. And so this was an opportunity for us to really sit at the table and have real authentic dialogue, right, and conversation around the impacts of racism, not just the system racism, but structural racism. You saw Julie presented a beautiful slide that spoke to those inequities that we continue to see, but it also got to us to the place where, like, what is the promise? Because I think we often will sit in spaces and talk about the issues, we talk about the problems, but we never talk about the promise. And when we can focus on the promise, that allows us to continue to move forward versus regressively kind of moonwalking back. And so I think we're still in the surface phases of these conversations, but yet they've been really deep-rooted in this concerns and the promises that we desire to see for our communities.
Yeah, I'll add to that. To give you a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. Like the capacity of our group to really define language, right? We spent a lot of time early on, like, what do these words mean? Like, how do we find alignment around language, and like, what type of story do we want to tell? And what really makes it unique, right? Like, oftentimes you hear about like centering and elevating voices of color, right? Like, which is absolutely, I think, critical when you're doing any form of equity work. You have to center those who are most impacted and affected by it. But when you look beyond that,
Broke the mic.
all right, now
you can really drop it.
So when I was sitting out there earlier today, I was like, I'm gonna get that mic that keeps, I'm gonna get the mic that doesn't work, right? Because I promised myself I was gonna work on my positive self-talk, but I stand corrected. I got the mic that doesn't work. No, what I was trying to say, like, just to give folks a peek behind the curtain, when we came together, like, we really focused on defining language, right? Like, what do these words mean? Like, play equity, sports equity, right? Physical activity, movement. Like, we really took the opportunity to lean into, like, how do we want to define this language and have substantive conversations about how to move the needle. So as Bookie mentioned, that the activities aren't regressive, right? And that we're actually moving the needle forward. And we were very clear early on, and I definitely want to thank LA84, Renata, the Play Equity Fund, for really convening the group. Because, again, folks talk about centering voices of color, centering communities of color, and I think it's absolutely critical that folks most impacted by structural racism, sexism, so forth and so on, are those leading the equity designs, right? It adds a level of authenticity to it. But this particular initiative is so powerful as a Voices for Play Equity movement, because it's truly centering communities of color, people of color, and it's BIPOC-led. Right, and it allows for folks to have a level of authenticity about, like, what do our communities look like? What do our communities need? We don't need saviors, right? We don't need that. Like, there's nothing wrong with our communities. Like, I'm down from Oakland. I know Bookie's in Seattle, and I'm very familiar with LA. Right, there's nothing wrong with our communities. What's wrong with our communities is that they're under-resourced, that they're disinvested, right? So the folks who are being disinvested, who live in communities that have been historically disinvested, should be the folks designing the initiatives to eliminate those structural inequities in the first place, and not just giving a cursory seat at the table. It's our table.
Yeah.
We need that access. So it's been very powerful being a part of it.
I'd just like to add that if you haven't noticed, I'm a middle-aged white woman. And I've often said in this group, like, am I the right person to be leading this in Philadelphia? And am I worth that seat at the table? Should it be somebody else? And I remember Renata saying to me, use everything you've got. Like, if you're at the table, use it. And I think that what this opportunity to work with this group of people, and there's more that aren't on this panel, is to be vulnerable and to learn and to listen and to be able to tell that story and be okay. But I think also giving me the courage to talk about race up front.
Yeah.
Like, we're not talking about a bunch of little white kids in Philadelphia. We're talking about the black and brown communities that are disinvested. And last night, somebody said at dinner, what's more powerful than, you know, a couple of white women calling that out? You know, like, it's one thing for people that are in it and live it to call it out, but for people that can say to other white people, this is not right, and what's happening here needs to be addressed, and it needs to be fair, and it needs to be equitable. So I'll just say that I have been given an opportunity to be a little bit more brave in all of that by being part of this group.
So I want to
like
capture
it.
that. White women, you heard that, right? Beth said it, so now it's time for you to step up. And I'm serious about that. It's time for you to step up and do what you've been called to do. And that is decrease these inequities that we continue to see. We're going to support you in that too. You're not by yourself.
It sounded like we had these secret meetings when we were meeting. Yeah. No.
This is how we talk when we're alone, by the way. We just brought it to the stage.
Yeah.
I would just uplift, it really was a safe space, really creating the conversations. I mean, I think Beth hit it on the head, right? Really centering the voices most impacted at the margins and really uplifting all the other inequities that we talk about, right? We're not siloed. So I think you all in Oakland are really good about really talking to your, local urban leagues, working with other partners, not just the SBYD sector, but really uplifting. We are part of the larger community, and I think that's part of the beauty of the work and sort of uplifting those most impacted and the values that we center on. And so I think I would sort of add that in terms of these secret meetings we've been having. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I mean, I think collective action starts with individual commitment to this work, right? Tell us a little bit about what made you all become movement builders for Play Equity. Like, what was the experience that you had, or the part that solidified this for you, either as an individual or to join a part of this collective movement that you all are building in your cities and collectively together? And Beth, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I know exactly where I was standing. I know, what did it. But I had run a basketball clinic in South Philadelphia with the Division I women's teams from our city. There were 6 teams, and all these little girls came out. There was 200 little girls at the first one, and their parents. We did a coaches clinic. We did all this stuff, and then all the parents were coming up to me afterwards and saying, "Okay, what are you going to do next?" And I thought, this was kind of a one-shot deal, but I didn't say that. I just kind of said, well, this is the beginning of the season. Now you can have your daughters go play on the school team. And every parent that was standing there said, well, we don't have school teams. And I was like enraged. And that was it. I said, that's not right. And I grew up 4 miles from Center City. I could walk to the city line. But my life looked a whole lot different with respect to access to sport. And so that was the day for me. I keep getting, thank you.
Fernando?
I have an interesting relationship with sports. I would say it's complex. I didn't grow up playing sports. I didn't feel safe playing sports. Growing up as a gay Latino man in LA, both my brothers played sports. I was skipped in the family. And so I come at it from that perspective. My background is in public policy and government, so really using the vehicle of sport, play, and movement as a vehicle to advance systems change and public policy. I think that's sort of been my perspective. I'm seeing the power just in the year and a half that I've been here within the organization and working with all of you that on Saturday we were in Boyle Heights for an event we had for Girls Play Day. Hearing a girl call out for her mom to come see her do a flip in the gym, I mean, that to me is powerful. And so really uplifting those voices and ensuring the barriers aren't there in terms of making it safer for all of our kids to be able to play with all the benefits that come with that. So I think for me, that's sort of the lens I come at it from. I'm going back to collective action, so.
I mean, if you think back to the title of the panel, it's justice, right?
Right.
It's around justice. Sport is a justice issue, right? Bookie and Robert, I'm going to take you a little bit to the work. You can share a little bit about what did it for you all as well, but taking you to the next question as well. Think about, and I love the way you frame it, Bookie, around not the challenges, but the promise. Like, what's preventing that promise from coming true for the kids that you all are serving?
You know, I mean, obviously that's complex, and that's the reason why we're here. If we had the answer, we wouldn't be sitting here looking at a panel trying to give us responses. I think you have to look at really where is community at, and how are we defining community, and where currently are we placed at, and really what drives us? What are we passionate about? And I use a concept, and this really gets back to how I even got involved in this movement building. It started as a little kid, right? And it started with the concept, and I think we all have experienced this. It's called pain, passion, and purpose. It's the 3 Ps in life we all will experience. And I want you to think about a pain point in life that then fueled a passion that you had for something that then launched you into a purpose. And that pain was displacement. And it wasn't that I was moved away from my community or I had to go find another location in a house. It was the fact that I had to go play on the other side of town to experience baseball. And when that was removed from me, it wasn't that I was removed from my community. It was the fact that my grandmother and my grandfather could not see me play. They came to every single game. But then when I would come home, I would look at my peers and I would look at them and I would find out, like, what's wrong? Why aren't you guys experiencing the same joy that I'm experiencing? Well, social determinants of health began to entrap them. They started to get drug addicted. They started to get incarcerated. They started to die, a physical death and a spiritual death. And that then fueled me to make change and really see what can be done. But I knew that it had to be done in a collective effort, right? And so movement building, even when I began this work, I knew that I had to have the community behind me. Because if it was just me, now I became a savior. And so the promise is really about the collective action and our ability to really coalesce a group of folks, whoever that may be, right? And then allow them to kind of share vision. And I think that's what we're missing, is an ability to share vision. And it doesn't necessarily mean that vision has to be within your organization or within kind of that siloed group that you tend to be in. That shared vision is across the board for community so that they can see it. The Seattle Mariners need to know what that vision is, that of baseball beyond borders. The Boys and Girls Club need to know what that vision is. So now you see that it's more than just one organization, it's a whole collective. That's, I think, where you're gonna see that promise continue to be fulfilled.
It's such a complex question. I'll start with like the inspiration. One of my colleagues, Janet Carter, I don't know if she's still in the building, but we had a conversation several years ago when we were struggling with, like, we're recruiting coaches, we're training coaches, but kids still aren't playing, right? Like, the same kids are playing over and over and over again. We want them to play, but that equity gap around sport, play, movement was not moving, right? So we needed to develop a new strategy around trying to get to the systemic reasons, the root causes that were leading to those inequities that we were seeing on a day-to-day basis. Like, that was the start of it all for us, right? Like what can we do? Can we build and leverage a model of collective action, of collective impact that takes a cross-sector approach to solving these things? And we've seen tremendous success, right? A lot more kids are playing in the markets where we work. Barriers are being addressed at a root cause, right? So we're seeing movement there, and we're really, really proud of that work. Now, when you ask, like what's stopping that from happening, I think Julie laid it out quite well when you think about like having to dismantle and rebuild a system. I think those barriers remain in place and they remain intractable because we don't take a systemic view on how to unpack them, right? When you think about, just to give you a quick example, we're always addressing the things that we can see, right? We have to get, as I think she laid out, that graphic that had the iceberg, right? Like getting under the surface and getting to those root causes. Like if you're doing these things, you can have some change, right? You can hit that promise that Bookie talked about, right? Like you have to address the lack of the power dynamics that exist in communities, right? And have plans for them and build strategies around them. You have to address the relationships and connections that people in low-income communities don't have vis-a-vis power and resources and field space. You have to have plans that address the mental models that exist and inform all of that in our communities. Because if our kids don't see themselves as athletes, and there's not resources, and there's not field space, and there's not coaches, right? Like, then what are you doing here, right? You're not. We're just showing up and moving the ball around amongst ourselves, kicking it back and forth without creating that level of sustainable long-term change. Again, that centers the most vulnerable above us. So I think if we start to employ those strategies, we can start to see that change that we all believe is possible.
Appreciate both of those perspectives and just thinking about how you get to that next level. Beth and Fernando, kick it back to you in terms of, how individuals and organizations can really start to try to amplify the impact of that collective work in terms of the work that you all are doing, and also how do you get, take that moment that you had, Beth, and get other people and get marginalized people to help support and be part of that movement. How have you done that? Fernando, I know you've had policy wins here. Like, how have you been able to take those feelings and ideas of injustice and actually make it into impact that you've been able to achieve?
Organize, organize, organize. I think that's been the key, at least in LA, what's worked for us is really organizing the sector and around a shared vision and values. And so we've had some wins around resources from the county, $15 million from the CFCI dollar opportunity. Senator Josh Newman in Sacramento on the recess bill, and Senator Lola Smallwood Cuevas on resources for more spaces for sport, play, and movement. And so that's really been the key to our work. And I think building the trust among the organizations that, collectively, we as Play Equity Fund, working with all of you, have a lot of powerful impact. Having a organization like Peace Players go and speak to the community college board of trustees as to why access to their facilities is important and why the fees should be lowered, check. Like you can't sort of match that opportunity of really talking to the decision makers. So I think with organizing, making sure that we're in the right rooms and the conversations when these conversations are happening around funding priorities, on access to facilities, and just making the issue itself, a top priority. You don't think about sort of sport, play, and movement as a top tier issue, but it's interconnected with all the other issues in our community, from homelessness to transportation inequity to housing, food insecurity. I think our sort of role has been to insert ourselves in those conversations. CFCI was a great example, right? Sport, play, and movement is an early intervention. Those dollars were voted on by Measure J for early intervention work. Hey, sport, play, and movement is an early intervention. Boom, we got 100 people there. They spoke, testified, there's $15 million. So I think that's sort of the secret sauce, is really values driven around what can happen when we see the wins happening. And so I think building the trust with folks has been key to that work. I'm excited to sort of see what happens. The last thing I would add is sort of get data. Don't get mad, get data. So this year we're going to embark on what we think is the first of its kind, the first statewide survey of youth sports participation throughout the state of California. We're oversampling the Central Valley, Northern California, to really hear from youth and their parents what are the barriers statewide, so that when we go to Sacramento, we have, here's the collective voice of Central Valley, of Northern California, of Oakland, of San Diego. And that survey will come out in the next few months. And so really coming to these members with the collective voice and the data to back it up. So I think that's sort of how we see the full circle of organizing coming together.
That's great. Yeah. Beth, anything
You took
to
my
add?
answer. I do think that as an intermediary, you can't be all in one space or the other. Our team does such a great job of embedding in the various sport communities, and everybody on our team has played a unique role in the various sport communities in Philadelphia, from rec to being small organizational leaders to playing and coming up through the school district and all the things. So I think there has to be some, it can't be fake. Like, it has to be, you have to gain trust, and I think that's your people. The people are able to gain trust by the lived experience, and then using that seat at the table to tell that story, but not to just say, okay, we learned all this from over here, but to really engage people in that process. I think that's something that we're getting better at. And we just had an administration change, and we're going to continue to tell the story and get into the rooms that we can to say that every organization doing this work is saving lives on a daily basis, so we need to make sure that we resource that, and we need to make sure that we commit as a city. We're not telling a story that people are anti. Who would look you in the eye and be like, "Youth sports stinks for kids"? Like, no, it doesn't. We all know it's good. So I think just really, building trust and telling the stories to as many people as possible, so you can kind of nudge change.
As folks that are in the thick of the work, doing the movement building, doing the collective action, the ultimate goal is systemic change. Thinking about Julie's image, sharpen your pickaxes. How do you scale that up? How do you, folks in the room that are thinking about how they do this in their own communities, in their own cities, how do you scale up that collective movement building to be able to make that systemic change?
I'll say this because I'll be quick. Get off your couch of comfort and your sofa of safety. Those two things. If you do that, you're going to have some success. But also in the philanthropy space. And do we still have people from philanthropy here? I want you to stand up if you are. Just stand up. I'm not shaming you by no means. Just be quick. Just stand up. If you don't know them and they don't know you, that's a problem. Those are the relationships we're going to have because the only way we can get to chisel at this iceberg is through those relationships that will actually help us get to that point.
I mean, I guess I can go next. I mean, again, it's such a complex
Right.
question, but I think you need three things. You need to be present when you want to talk about like how to get started. I mean, I think Fernando, you touched on it earlier. You need research and community organizing, right? Like you have to organize. You have to get off that, what do you call it, the couch of comfort. Is that what you said? You have to get off that couch of comfort, and you have to, community organize and understand the context of the local community that you're trying to impact and address from an equity perspective. Second, like you need to engage with those funders, right? They have a responsibility in those spaces as well, right? So that second step is going to be about like capacity building and collective action, right? Once you understand the context from a research perspective, once you've organized and built hopefully some cross-sector collaboratives, now you can work collectively and take collective action and start to build the capacity of the ecosystem, right? The ecosystem, it moves on its own. It's its own system, right? The youth sports system is a system onto itself, right? So you have to build the capacity of those within that ecosystem to move the work forward. And then you need to evaluate and measure, right? Like you need to do those things. You need to understand the progress that's being made so you can course correct. So you just can't say, oh, we've done one thing here, let's hope it works. So again, research, community organizing, capacity building, collective action, and then evaluation in that order would be my recommendation.
I would just add, celebrate the wins.
Celebrate,
I think we always
yes.
forget that sometimes, and I think that builds the trust. And I would just throw out their self-care. I think really folks are already at bandwidth, and so when you add, hey, can you show up to this meeting at 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., I think really being conscious of that and building the infrastructure, I would say, and invest in the infrastructure that allows for these conversations and these decision makers to hear from the folks on the ground. I think that's the work we try to do at the Play Equity Fund, to uplift those voices, to folks need to hear it. Because, like you said, who can be against it? You never know, but I I think
They're out there.
They're right. They are out there. They're not invited to these secret meetings. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I would sort of uplift those points.
And I would just, in addition to all that, call on your legislators to be bold and to stop hand-wringing about what is happening with our children and gun violence and, oh, they're traumatized and all the things. Well, if you stop saying all that and invest, stop. We were on a call with a council member and somebody just said, when your budget doesn't match your mission, then your mission is a lie. So don't complain about what kids are doing or not doing, and make the move. Be bold, be passionate, and drive the change. And I think that when you have all of what we talked about, you're making the case for being bold in the space. So I just call on people to be bold.
I want to add one thing. I know we're out of time, and somebody's probably going to yell at me. But Beth is spot on, and I want to piggyback on something that she said. When we first started this movement work years ago back in Oakland, I remember walking into the previous administration's office when you talk about call your legislators. And I remember asking, like, what is the mayor's position on sports equity, on play equity? And the response was, oh, she supports it. But what is it? And I'm like, well, we got some work to do, right? So you have to raise awareness, you have to talk about these issues, and you have to advocate. It's like one of the other panelists said, advocate, 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 organize, organize, organize.
I'm glad you all said it, so I didn't have to say it, but yes, your local public sector institutions are also funders in this space, so please make sure that they know who you are just as much as philanthropy knows who you are as well. We're out of time. I want to thank you all for being here as part of this panel. I want to thank you all. Please enjoy the rest of the summit. I'm going to ask for one word from each of you that describes how you feel about this work moving forward. Fernando.
Community.
I can't do one word. Reevaluate your position.
You go.
It's very much inspired.
Be fearless. 2 words, sorry.
Thank you.